Despite the rally over the last two trading sessions this week, for Friday's lows, it hasn't changed my signals back to bullish. It still may tomorrow. Again, I'm looking for clues. Do we have a bottom from Friday's low with the bullish inside day we got on Monday? Or is there more work to be done and we end up forming divergences like here in the 4-hour time frame on the RSI? How it unfolds, but signals remain bearish. This is the NASDAQ 4-hour chart. This is the S&P 4-hour chart. And we saw NASDAQ signals turn back to bearish 2 weeks ago. We saw with our short trading week last week, we saw the S&P signals turn bearish on that Tuesday to start last week off, and we had that bigger sell-off, dropping 4.25%, 5.89% on NASDAQ. I'll be watching. Do my signals start turning back to bullish with the CPI data? You have the momentum line still bearish, and the cloud is still bearish. Under this line representing the swing move, which is going sideways. Signals still remain bearish. RSI is still in negative territory. So if my signals start to turn back to bullish with the CPI, we probably have a bottom for Friday. If they remain bearish and we start selling off with it, you're probably going to get a divergence. Those 60-minute charts and maybe here on these 4-hour charts. We'll be watching to see how it unfolds. Regardless however it unfolds, I'm looking for a possible bottom and then a Fed pivot rally that will last several weeks, probably into early October, late September, early October in all likelihood. The meeting September 18th, I believe it'll probably go into October in all likelihood. Historically, that's what it's done. Fed pivot rallies. Here I have the S&P daily chart, and again, signals are bearish for right now. Momentum is negative, so again, bulls are going to turn it around. They got to get us back above the 10 and the 20 period moving average, and we got to see momentum signals begin to turn back to bullish. We got to see the 4-hour charts and the 60-minute charts all begin to turn back to bullish. I am looking for a bottom, but my signals right now remain bearish. Same thing here for the NASDAQ. Again, signals are bearish here in the daily time frame. We've got to turn that around if we're going to see a bigger rally, if we're going to get a Fed pivot rally. For NASDAQ, I still think we're going to come back and fill the gap up here. Could still go lower. I'm trying to find a bottom surrounding the 200. Signals don't turn back to bullish. NASDAQ daily chart here. Again, we had that gray shaded area saying something was getting ready to happen. It did, and we started seeing the sell-off. Signals have been bearish on NASDAQ for about 2 weeks, and the previous week there on the S&P 500. Please support the channel with the link directly below that allows me to be able to provide you this information. If you like the charts, you like the indicators, let me know that by supporting the channel. If you could take a moment to do that, I would really, really appreciate it. I do need to hear from you in order to make it work. Just put it all out there for free and ask that you do what you can to help out. So please consider helping out today by following the link. Take you to a secured site and you can donate any amount you want. Thank you for your consideration for that. We have the NASDAQ with a bearish reversal of conditions. Again, momentum has turned bearish. We had the momentum line turn bearish. We had the cloud here turn bearish. Reversal of conditions again 2 weeks ago. Lost the 10 period. We've stalled at the 10, and then we had the bigger sell-off. Last week we dropped 5.89%. Had the largest weekly drop in about 2 years, and on the S&P, the largest drop in about a year. And oscillator's negative. Bars are red, the cloud is red, everything is red. We're below the 10 and 20. The 10 is crossed below the 20 here on NASDAQ. If we can find a bottom here with Friday's low or surrounding our 200 period with bullish divergences, we'll be looking to see if we go back up and fill that gap there at 20,400 or so. Likely be the case because we're starting to see green go up at the very beginning of the week here on the weekly chart. I think that will eventually allow for a counter trend. Maybe we go a little bit lower and then get it. Maybe Friday's low holds. But regardless, I do think a bottom will develop and you'll get a counter trend and go up and hit 20,400. S&P, I think, will still hit the channel line in the monthly time frame. Again, starting the week off with the green bar causes me to believe that we'll get another divergence point here. We already had this divergence give us about a 10% sell-off. I think this divergence will form and we will move to a new all-time high, and then you'll put in a top and start a reversal and usher in a bear market. You'll see the market crash somewhere around 20% or so for its first leg down. Again, momentum is still bearish with both NASDAQ and S&P with the momentum line, and here with the momentum line not seen here, but with the both conditions we've had here with red bars, red cloud. We're below the 10 period moving average here on the S&P daily. Again, if we can rally excuse me, if we can rally, frog in my throat there, if we can rally with the, recently had been very, very sick, still got a little bit of a frog in my throat. We can rally above the 50-period moving average, get back above the 10, then again we can attempt a recovery right here and now to try to flip signals. You got to close above the upper cloud to flip this back to bullish momentum. If we go lower, again, we have the 100 period that we saw in the other chart, seen in this chart directly below, and again we could still try to find a bottom with a divergence on those 60-minute charts. But right now, the rally so far over the last 2 days, we've gapped higher. It's done nothing to change momentum, at least so far. We'll see if it happens with the CPI or if we get further selling, forming bear flags, possible bear flags, but they mean nothing unless they're validated with a break of the lower boundary. I'll show you those in this video. With the rally that we've had the last 2 trading sessions, you got a possible bear flag here forming on NASDAQ. Again, the pattern is meaningless unless we break down here on the 5-minute chart back below the trend line, back below the 200, the black line right there. So we would have to turn back down. And again, we push up through the pattern, then it could cancel it out unless you get a false breakout above that level. But just some things I'm paying attention to here on the NASDAQ. And again, if we continue down, if we break down, then you can form a divergence on the 60-minute charts. If you break up and we start seeing signals all begin to turn bullish, then it could validate Friday's low as a bottom. So again, with that potential inside day in the daily time frame, we're watching to see which way this is going to play out, but possible bear flag. Again, the pattern is meaningless unless we see a breakdown of the pattern. And again, happens with the CPI data. CPI is supposed to be tame and stop it from dropping the NASDAQ down by 500 points back up at the July top on July 11th there. NASDAQ 15-minute chart, here it is. Again, I've excluded some shadows. We could adjust it a little bit as well, but again, you get the idea that there's a possible bear flag. No guarantee it plays out unless we start dropping below the 200 5-minute chart and the 50. The green line right there, here on the 15-minute chart. So that green line right there, actually, the trend line, so the lower boundary. Otherwise, again, the pattern is meaningless, just like candlestick patterns. Candlestick patterns, they've got to be confirmed, and then you got to get a follow through. Here it is, possibly on the S&P 500. Again, maybe it's not done yet, but again, we gapped higher Monday. We didn't fill this gap right here. We still may fill this gap. But it'll be interesting. Do we go a little bit higher and then turn, or do we turn down? Or does this pattern not play out and we confirm Friday's low as a bottom and get confirmation the inside day that we had on Monday, and see all my signals begin to turn back to bullish? So again, I'll be watching to see how it unfolds. This is the 5-minute chart right here, and I've just drawn a trend line right here, playing connect the dots right here. So here it is in the 15-minute chart, and again, you've got these 200 periods on the S&P and NASDAQ directly overhead. Maybe we rally to them and then turn. We'll see what happens. The 50s are still below the 200s here. But again, possible divergences in play. We did have one right there with the gap higher initially at the open. It's just something I'm paying attention to. And again, we could still form these divergences on the 60-minute charts. Here we reached an extreme on NASDAQ 60-minute chart up to Friday low. We've rebounded back up. We're still below the 50-period moving average, the green line, which has now crossed the 200. So again, it's still possible we form a divergence before all is said and done. If we don't, we need to see signals all begin to turn back to bullish. But right here, we probably could see a divergence develop if the bear flags begin to play out there on those intraday charts. And again, that can take us to a rally towards our 50 period here, towards the 200 period on those 15-minute charts. So just something worth paying attention to. Possible bear flags that could still form divergences, or do we confirm Friday's low and see signals turn back to bullish? So far, we haven't seen signals turn back to bullish. Bearish, so we'll see what happens. NASDAQ had a rally today of 0.9%, up 168 points. We've come back and filled a couple of these gaps, so we'll be watching. Like I said, eventually I think a bottom develops in an ABC move. I think we'll complete a B, and then we'll get a C move that will come back and fill this gap up here at the 20,400 area and likely see a top. So this may not be done yet. So I'll be watching these RSIs Do we roll over here and drop back below 50 at some point tomorrow or with the PPI data on Thursday? May not be that we see the bottom with NASDAQ until we reach the extremes here. Have to reach the extremes with momentum, but again, it's headed towards that level and it's still bearish at this point. So again, we'll be watching to see, do we come down here and flirt with this 200 period moving average and again get a large ABC formation? That's again what I think is going on. Now things are bearish for NASDAQ in that we're below the 50 and the 200. They've gotten a bearish cross and parameters gone into negative territory. That's got to turn around if we're going to see a bottom form. Get back above those moving averages. They got to get it back to a bullish cross, and we got to get parameter in positive territory. If we don't, there's risk still of lower levels. Again, signals remain bearish. We'll see immediately turn back to bullish, or there's more downside. Here with the S&P, again, it's below the 10 and 20. They've gotten across. Momentum is bearish. It's going into the negative region. So again, we'll be watching the 100 period moving average, the lower boundary of the Bollinger Band. We'll be watching to see if we go lower, do we form a divergence on the hourly charts, NASDAQ and S&P, or do we try to find a bottom immediately with the CPI data and rally big time and turn signals back to bullish? We'll see which way it unfolds. Thing here with the S&P 500, you've got the 50 period directly overhead. We can rally into that in our 200 period in the 15-minute time frame. We've come back and filled a couple of gaps. You got this gap down here we have not filled. We still may do that before all is said and done. If you do, you might see the RSI end up forming a divergence before all is said and done, and then try to bottom out and rally back up to a new all-time high to fill the gap back here at 5669.67 or 5670 rounding up. Whoops, sorry about that. Wrong button. So again, I think a bottom's going to develop. My signals remain bearish. My signals try to turn back to bullish. If they do, does a divergence develop? Or does Friday's low hold and we end up firming the bullish inside day from Monday? I've been talking about those two scenarios since Monday, since we got that inside day. One of them is probably going to produce a bottom. We'll see which one. Bulls and bears fight it out for control. Turned off of that monthly trend line on NASDAQ. And here, again, I talked about this channel from the pandemic low over here. Great length and detail leading up into the July high. We talked about that we were advancing on declining volume. I talked about these two trend lines at great length and detail. And again, told you I was looking for a top surrounding these trend lines and where they intersect. Straight into it, we got the peak in July 10th. I told you we're going to get the CPI tomorrow. We could see a CPI sell-off if it's tame data, even if it's good. That's exactly what happened. The toppy tail, and then the following week we got the reversal bar. And I told you on the 12th, 11th, I thought we had peaked on the 10th, the day before, and then on the 12th, that Friday, to be looking for a big ugly red bar the next week for an evening star reversal, and we got it. So again, we've talked about these charts at great length and detail, but again, this is why I believe NASDAQ has peaked. We came down, we broke the trend line, we bounced this trend line, if we exclude the shadow over here, got back above the trend line and then dropped below it, and we're again still hovering just under the 20-week moving average. I think we'll eventually bottom out and go back up and fill the gap at 20,400, but not move to a new high, and then come back down and end up probably breaking this trend line right here. Do you think we're in a topping process? I think NASDAQ will form a double top. Eventually, if we make our way back down over here or down to this low, you've got, again, on the monthly chart, you've got a massive head and shoulders pattern. Once we peak, we should see a drop, pretty dramatic drop, rather quickly once we begin top out. That will be a few weeks after the Fed pivot. Historically, that has been the case, as I've talked about at great length and detail. Again, a blueprint for what's going on. Don't lose sight of the bigger picture with those trend lines and long-term channels. But also, again, I do think the NASDAQ is in a topping process along with S&P. I think S&P is going to go make a new high. I've been very, very clear about that, but I think NASDAQ has already peaked. I think it will eventually come back up here. I'm looking for a bottom. Now, I told you to be watching the inside day that we had yesterday to start the week off. We got a bullish inside day. That's not been confirmed. It still may be confirmed with the CPI and mark Friday's low as a bottom. That's certainly possible. But the two scenarios I'm looking at for a bottom is, do we have a bullish inside day that gets confirmed, a bullish two-day Harami pattern that gets confirmed? So far it's not. Or do we just rally up here, turn anything back to bullish and end up coming back closer to our 200 period moving average here beyond this low and maybe form a divergence on those 60-minute charts. That's what I've been talking about. Regardless of which way it plays out, whether we go lower and get a divergence and bottom out and rally, or whether we bottom out with Friday's low and get that confirmed and see signals start to turn back to bullish, regardless of which way it plays out, I think that my signals are going to, I think we're going to form a bottom and my signals will revert back to bullish in all likelihood ahead of the Fed pivot, maybe this week or next week, to that Fed pivot. And then I think you're going to get a multiple week rally that's going to go beyond this high and take us back up to the 20,400 area, where again, I don't think you're going to exceed this peak over here, which came in just under the 20,700 area in that high 20,600 range. But I do think you're going to overthrow 20,400 peak, and then I think you're going to see a top. And I think right around the time that we just overthrow this level, the S&P peak out as well, I think you will see divergence between the two, and I do believe S&P will make a new high and NASDAQ will not. And I think that we're forming a large double top pattern, much like what Bitcoin did in its topping process, where it kind of went, back and forth since March. And again, Bitcoin could bottom out and rally back up along with NASDAQ, and again, form a larger divergence with the S&P 500. It already has multiple point divergences with the S&P 500, which again is a huge red flag in and of itself. But this is what I think is going on. Again, I'm going to be looking to see if I'm correct and we get a bottom here soon. Again, my signals turned back to bearish about 2 weeks ago on NASDAQ, a bearish engulfing candlestick, and eventually it was confirmed and we lost the 10 period moving average, the red line there, and we're holding below the 10. The 10 is now crossed below the 20. But I think that we're going to eventually end up getting back above the 10, but probably come down and take out this low in all likelihood. I could be wrong about that. I have the guts to tell you what I think. I think that, again, we're probably going to form a divergence on the 60-minute charts. Now, if I'm wrong, I've talked about this other bullish scenario where we get the bullish inside day and that we go higher. You had a bullish inside day over here, didn't play out. The bearish engulfing from the previous session did end up playing out. So again, we'll be watching to see how this unfolds, regardless of how the bottom develops. I'm looking for a bottom. My signals all start turning back to bullish, then maybe Friday's low is it. If we go down one more time, then maybe we have to form a divergence, and then we get the rally. But this is what I think is going to happen with the Fed pivot. I think you're going to get a Fed pivot rally that will go on for several weeks, probably into early October. When we had the Fed pivot, the first rate cut in 2007, it was the same day as we're going to have it this month on the 18th. We rallied for 3.5 weeks into the October 11th peak there, got the top, and we formed a little double top pattern. I think you're going to see the same thing happen with the S&P rally with the Fed pivot. Daily, you've got that shot of the double top pattern. Taking the weekly and the monthly, you're forming a larger head and shoulders pattern. But the point is that this followed a 20.5% drop, and again, it kept dropping until we crashed by 58%. And this is what is likely coming with the topping process, because we know recession is coming. We know the Fed's hands are tied. They can't lower rates aggressively. They can't bring back QE infinity and beyond unless they want a bunch of inflation, unless they want to repeat performance of the 1970s. Fed actually needs a recession to help them deal with the inflation issue. Again, those people keep telling us, oh, no, the Fed's, it's going to be 2020 and 2021 all over again. They're going to lower rates and bring back QE. They're going to let a bear market happen. They're not going to let a recession stay. Yes, they have to. Hands are tied. If they were to do those policies, if they were to lower rates to nothing, if they were to bring back QE infinity and beyond, I'm not saying that they won't do it at some point, but right now, if they did it, inflation would come roaring back. You got to be careful. Just know we're going to have this recession. And again, but the valuations over the weekend being at nosebleed levels, Warren Buffett's hoarding so much cash because he knows what's coming. And I think you've got a very good shot leading a topping process surrounding the long-term trend lines we've looked at. Here we peaked October 11th. I think we could see something very similar. A multiple week rally. My signals turn back to bullish. Now, if they don't turn back to bullish, they remain bearish, well, can go lower. But I think they're going to turn back to bullish surrounding the Fed pivot either this week or next week. I think that is very likely. Talked about the rate cuts, marking tops, bottoms, and continuations of the trend. The last one we got was a continuation of the trend. The downside, the previous one to the continuation to the upside. Prior to that, the May 1st marked the bottom. Prior to that, the March peak marked the top. Again, I think this could mark bottom for the S&P 500. We get a big rally, a Fed pivot rally. But the rate, I think I said the rate FOMC meetings for me. FOMC meetings with the rate cuts and the pauses have been marking the turns in the market. That's what I meant to say. Again, just going to be watching to see if my signals begin to try to form a bottom either this week or next week. Remain bearish and something else is going on. But I'm, again, historically, rallied about 3.5 weeks surrounding Fed pivot. You're going to get your Fed pivot rally. Now, last time we got the CPI data was right here with this candle of indecision, August 14th. It was a continuation, and then we reversed. That right here, we dropped 500 points on NASDAQ, and again, on the 11th, it was cool data, but yet the market still sold off on it. Bounced out the 10. We got the lower high at the 78.6 Fibonacci and turned down sharply. Again, we were slamming up into those trend lines I was talking about in the weekly and the monthly time frame. If it's cool data, we could still sell off. Still possible. Again, we have a bottom here, so I'll be watching again. Do we confirm push inside day and try to get back above the high of the bar here, NASDAQ, and the same thing for the S&P, or do we go lower and form divergences on those hourly charts, which again is still very, very, very possible. Again, here's the S&P daily. Same thing. You got that bullish inside day yesterday. Does Friday's low hold, and we start going higher? Do we have a bottoming tail and we just keep going? Or is this a shaven head kind of a candlestick? We're forming bear flags on the intraday charts, and if the bear flags are confirmed, we break down from the trend line. Then do we still go lower and, again, flirt with our 100 period moving average here, the 200 period on NASDAQ? So we'll be watching to see how it unfolds. We're still below the 10 period moving average. The 10's now crossing the 20. We already have that with NASDAQ. So again, I'm looking for a bottom. Still think it's possible we go lower. Open-minded to Friday's low being it if my signals will turn back to bullish. If my signals don't turn back to bullish, then the risk is that we still set up a divergence on the hourly chart. So we'll see how it unfolds, but I think you'll see a bottom, but I also think you'll see new highs on the NASDAQ or on the S&P 500 to come back and fill the gap back up here, which we never did do. And to fill that gap, I think we're going to go hit that upper channel line in the monthly time frame and end up filling this gap and slamming up into that longer-term trend line. So that's what I think is going to happen. I think NASDAQ has sold off, had a bigger sell-off because I think it's going to set up a lower high. And like I said, I think the Dow has a good shot of having put in the peak. Sometimes the Dow starts to sell off as NASDAQ and S&P start to rally back up. Again, the jury is still out on the Dow. I'm not 100% sure. I have a lot of conviction about the NASDAQ. I'm not as certain about the Dow yet, so I need more evidence. So I'm trying to be upfront with you what I exactly believe is going on with the Dow, because I have the guts to tell you exactly what I think. And if I'm not 100% sure, I'm going to tell you I'm not 100% sure. I don't have the same certainty that I did with the NASDAQ. Something to consider is that we currently have a 6 of a 9 to the downside on the S&P. If we do go lower towards our 100 period moving average, if we do go lower for the next 3 sessions, and every bar is below the bar from 4 bars ago, you could get a 9 count. Go higher and cancel that out and start confirming the bullish inside day, then count will go bye-bye. If you get above the bar from 4 bars ago, which 1, 2, 3, 4, so you get above this bar right here, this bar 3, then this count's going to go bye-bye. If the bear flags play out on the intraday charts, this count is still very much in play. We did have a 9 count. I talked about these 9 counts back up here. We went a little bit higher, and then we turned, got a 9 count over here. July peak went a little bit higher on July 16th and diverged with the NASDAQ, and then we turned. Will this count complete? We'll see. 6 of a 9. There could be no interruptions. That means that if it does complete, it will complete by Friday, ahead of the Fed week. There's no guarantee the count will play out, but it is something I'm watching. Got a 6 of a 9 also here on NASDAQ. If we move closer to the 200 period, continue to close below the bar from 4 bars ago, then the count will complete. They don't always complete, But again, here you can see we had some really nice counts right here. The 9-9 signal marked that reversal. This 9 count marked a pullback. This 9 count marked a peak right here. And we turned, went just a little bit higher with the bearish engulfing. The counts do a fairly good job of showing price exhaustion up and down. So just something I'm paying attention to. We have 6 of 9 counts on NASDAQ and S&P 500. Data tomorrow. The day after that, we're going to get the PPI wholesale inflation. Watching, see what happens with that. We are forming some possible bear flags, but they're meaningless unless, again, the pattern breaks down on the 15 and 5-minute chart. I'll show you those patterns real fast. Showing you this chart. Again, this is the S&P monthly chart. Again, don't lose sight of the bigger picture. Again, we're probably going to form a bottom. Or historically, we've gotten a Fed pivot rally for several weeks. That will be the case here. We're going to bottom at some time for the Fed pivot, which is 1 week from right now. I think we'll probably rally several weeks into this trend line right here. Now, we've had NASDAQ already reach the upper channel line. I think NASDAQ has peaked. I think S&P will still reach this area. The red trend line, the upper boundary, again, excludes the shadows here from the 2000 top, where I think we're likely headed. Quickly, here it is up close. You can see, again, I've excluded the shadows over here at the 2000 top. We didn't quite reach it there in 2022. We were just under it there with our peak from the July peak by top. Again, I think you're probably going to run into that trend line in all likelihood. And then I think you're going to peak out, up, begin a reversal, start to usher in the bear market. So that's what I think is likely going to happen here. Lose sight of the big picture here. Signals remain bearish right now for momentum. They're probably going to turn back to bullish. Historically, we've gotten a Fed pivot rally. We'll probably see that this time. If that's the case, we can peak sometime late September or on into October, maybe early or mid-October, in all likelihood, if we get a Fed pivot rally, as I expect we're going to. Again, I still don't believe the S&P has topped. I think it will top surrounding this trend line. It's going to form a bottom, still probably rally higher. I believe NASDAQ topped on July 10th. Told you that says July 11th. It's in an ABC counter trend rally right now. Rally up to about the 20,400 area and overthrow it and likely form a double top. S&P goes higher. It has the possibility forming a double top in the daily time frame. But again, we still have this larger head and shoulders that could be in play here in the monthly and the weekly time frame, which again could take us back down, get a rally, and then eventually again head towards the pandemic lows and the midpoint here. Bigger would take us back to 1575, the two peaks, which were the tops for the bull market runs 2000 and 2007. And we're looking at the monthly chart, so keep that in mind. Lose sight of the big picture. And I believe NASDAQ has already peaked, as I've said. It's going to go back up, make a lower high, double top in the time frame. But then I think, again, these head and shoulder patterns very, very much in play in the monthly time frame. And here I have this parallel channel here from the data that we have for the NASDAQ 100. Quickly, the Dow's already reached the upper channel line. I have a couple different lines here drawn from these lows over here. And, oops, my trend line moved on me. It's possible the Dow's forming a major top from our peak from 2 weeks ago. Posted this chart of the Dow media. I got nearly 400,000 hits on it. People's complacency cracks me up, but one of the comments on this chart right here is, wow, he can draw two lines. People get so complacent, it cracks me up. Looking for a topping process. It takes time for a topping process to form. We hit this peak in 2022. We've now hit it again in 2024, forming a topping process. People dismiss it by saying, wow, you can draw a line or some nonsense like that. This is the same kind of complacency we saw, back at the bursting of the tech bubble. Nobody believed that it was possible, and it's absolutely incredible. That same complacency here today. People dismiss risk. They don't want to consider that. And like I said, I think the S&P is going to go make a new high. My signals remain bearish right now. I think they're going to revert back to bullish, but we're in a topping process. I'm looking at these trend lines. Just had the uninversion of the yield curve, warning a recession is 3 to 6 months away or so. Had the unemployment rate predict the recession. It hasn't been wrong in decades. People just believe, oh, if the market gets in trouble, the Fed's just going to lower rates. And yet the Fed can't lower rates like they did before. They've got a little problem called inflation. And if they lower rates aggressively and they bring rates down to zero again, guess what? Inflation's going to rear its ugly head. Can't do that. They can start lowering rates, but they can't drop them down to nothing. They start with QE, aggressive QE. Guess what? That's inflationary. That's got a major problem. People don't understand. On a complacency right now at these trend lines of resistance, and again, I believe the S&P is still going to go higher in all likelihood. The Dow slamming up into it, you get the NASDAQ slamming up into it. We're in a topping process. The warning signs and the Fed pivot associated with market tops cause market tops. Again, the Fed begins to lower rates because the recession is coming. The market begins to drop because it starts pricing in a recession. People go, well, we don't have recessions anymore. A lot of people have seen a bear market. Don't lose sight of the bigger picture. Again, the market is likely in a topping process. I told you I thought the NASDAQ had peaked. I think the Dow might have peaked 2 weeks ago. Divergence on the daily chart and hitting the weekly resistance trend line in here. Still might need more evidence for the Dow, but I do believe NASDAQ has peaked. I don't believe the S&P has peaked yet. Dow had that divergence with the RSI and the MACD, and then it had the divergence with the transports as well. So again, I'm watching to see, is this peak from around 2 weeks ago, is that going to mark a top in that area? So that's why I'm watching on the Dow. There's a channel we turned off with the Dow in the weekly time frame. We turned off of it right on the nose here. I talked about it before we got the sell-off, that possibly could be a peak on the Dow. Talked about this divergence at the time. And again, you've got this divergence going on with the MACD. It hasn't rolled over yet, but just something worth watching there on the Dow, especially since we've had this divergence between the transports and the Dow. Transports made a lower high. The Dow made a higher high. And again, they often diverge at turning points. So kind of interesting that we had that Dow theory sell signal as we're slamming up into those resistance levels. So I'll be watching this peak very closely. Things I'm paying attention to on the Dow.